The quantum communication array at the Interstellar Research Station Prometheus hummed with an unusual intensity. Most days, the massive installation picked up nothing more exciting than background radiation and the occasional stellar noise. But today was different. Dr. Aria Chen sat hunched over her workstation, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as she parsed through layers of incoming transmission data. The signal had arrived exactly 37 minutes ago, a desperate, fragmented cry for help that most would have dismissed as cosmic static. But Aria Chen was not most people. Her team had developed a unique signal processing algorithm that could extract meaningful patterns from what other researchers considered meaningless noise. The transmission bore the distinct quantum signature of the Korvax civilization, a species known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technological capabilities and intricate diplomatic networks. "Marcus," she called out, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the research facility. "You're going to want to see this." Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the tactical analysis room, his weathered face a map of experiences that defied conventional military logic. Once the most decorated and most controversial Special Operations Commander in Earth's Defense Forces, he now worked on the fringes of official channels, solving problems that conventional systems couldn't even comprehend. Aria pulled up a holographic representation of the transmission. Fractured images flickered, glimpses of a civilization under siege. Alien architectures crumbling. Entire planetary systems reduced to technological debris. At the center of the chaos, a relentless, swarming presence that seemed more machine than living entity. "The Null Swarm," Marcus muttered, his eyes narrowing. He had heard rumors, theoretical discussions among xenobiologists and strategic analysts. A technological collective that consumed and assimilated entire civilizations, leaving nothing but processed matter in its wake. The Korvax transmission was a last, desperate plea. Their message was clear. Help was needed, and time was running out. Most galactic civilizations would ignore such a call. The risk was too great, the potential for total annihilation too absolute. But humanity had always been different. Dr. Ibrahim Khan entered the room, a holographic display of complex quantum entanglement algorithms rotating slowly beside him. "The transmission contains multiple layers of encrypted data," he explained. "It's not just a distress call. It's a comprehensive diagnostic of the Null Swarm's technological infrastructure." Aria's algorithm continued to parse the signal, revealing intricate details. The Korvax weren't just asking for help. They were providing a complete breakdown of their attackers' systems, a final act of scientific documentation in the face of potential extinction. Marcus studied the holographic display, his mind already working through potential approach vectors. This wasn't a conventional rescue mission. This was a problem that would require something far more complex than traditional military intervention. "We'll need a team," he said finally. "Not soldiers, not traditional scientists. We need problem solvers, people who can think beyond established systems." Aria and Ibrahim exchanged a knowing glance. They had been waiting for a challenge like this, a problem that defied conventional understanding. A scenario that would push the boundaries of human creativity and technological innovation. The Interstellar Research Station Prometheus began to hum with a different energy. Somewhere in its vast communication networks, a message was being composed, a response to the Korvax's desperate transmission. Humanity was about to answer the call. The recruitment process was anything but traditional. Marcus Rodriguez didn't rely on official channels or standard personnel files. His team would be assembled through a series of intricate challenges that would test not just skills, but adaptive thinking. The first invitation arrived through an encrypted quantum network, a seemingly impossible puzzle that would take most researchers months to unravel. Dr. Samira Nakamura solved it in 37 minutes, a quantum systems engineer who had been quietly pushed out of mainstream research for her radical approaches to computational theory. She represented exactly the kind of unconventional thinker they needed. Next came Alejandro Reyes, a former deep space communication specialist who had developed a reputation for creating communication systems that could function in environments previously deemed impossible. His work had been dismissed by traditional research institutions, but Marcus recognized genius where others saw only anomalies. The team's psychological profiler was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus, though they shared a similar approach to problem-solving. She specialized in computational psychology, studying how intelligent systems make decisions and how those decision-making processes could be influenced or disrupted. Their first meeting took place in a secure facility buried deep beneath the Atacama Desert. The location was chosen for its isolation and its unique electromagnetic properties that could shield their communications from any potential interception. Dr. Aria Chen laid out the Korvax transmission, her holographic displays painting the room with intricate alien data patterns. "This is more than a distress call," she explained. "It's a comprehensive breakdown of a technological threat, unlike anything we've encountered." Ibrahim Khan brought up a series of complex algorithms that danced and shifted on the display. "The Null Swarm isn't just a technological collective," he said. "It's a system that processes information and assimilates resources with a level of efficiency that makes traditional AI look primitive." Alejandro leaned forward, his fingers tracing the complex communication patterns. "These transmission signatures," he muttered, "they're not just signals. They're a kind of language, a way of communication that's simultaneously technological and biological." Samira's eyes lit up. "It's a quantum communication system that blurs the line between information and physical matter," she said. "Traditional methods of interference or disruption won't work. We'll need to think completely outside existing technological paradigms." Marcus watched his team, a hint of a smile crossing his weathered face. These were not traditional researchers or soldiers. They were outcasts, mavericks who had been pushed to the margins of their respective fields because their thinking was too radical, too unconventional. Elena began mapping out the psychological profile of the Null Swarm. "It's not just a technological system," she explained. "It has decision-making processes that mimic biological adaptation, but with a rigidity that's ultimately its greatest weakness." The team worked through the night, breaking down the transmission, analyzing every quantum signature, every fractured piece of data. They weren't just preparing a response to the Korvax's distress call. They were developing an entirely new approach to technological conflict. As dawn broke over the Atacama Desert, Marcus looked at his team. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were problem solvers, individuals who saw challenges where others saw insurmountable obstacles. "We're not just going to save the Korvax," Marcus said quietly. "We're going to change how the galaxy understands technological conflict." The room fell silent, each team member understanding the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Somewhere in the depths of space, the Null Swarm continued its relentless advance. But now it would face something it had never encountered before: human unpredictability. The first stage of reconnaissance was nothing like traditional intelligence gathering. While most scientific teams would rely on long-range sensors and passive observation, Samira Nakamura had developed something entirely different. Her quantum resonance probe looked deceptively simple, a device no larger than a standard tablet, with a complex network of microscopic sensors that could simultaneously exist in multiple quantum states. It wasn't just a tool for observation. It was a sophisticated information collection system that could interpret data in ways traditional technology could not comprehend. The Null Swarm operates on a principle of absolute information assimilation, Samira explained, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "But every system has blind spots. We're going to find them." Alejandro Reyes had modified the probe's communication systems, creating a network of quantum-entangled signal carriers that could transmit information in patterns so complex they would appear as random noise to any conventional detection system. "We're not just collecting data," he said. "We're creating a language the swarm can't immediately interpret." Their first breakthrough came unexpectedly. The probe captured a series of communication patterns that seemed to be the null swarm's internal decision-making process. But it wasn't a straightforward binary system, or even a complex quantum computing network. It was something far more intricate, a hybrid system that processed information through a method that blurred the lines between computational logic and something almost biological. Elena Rodriguez's psychological analysis revealed the first critical insight. It's not just a technological system, she noted, reviewing the data patterns. It's making decisions, but with a rigidity that suggests a fundamental limitation in its adaptive capabilities. Marcus spread the collected data across the team's primary display. Fractured images of entire star systems consumed by the null swarm flickered like ghostly memories. Each system showed a similar pattern. Total consumption, absolute assimilation, but with subtle variations that suggested the swarm wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Dr. Ibrahim Khan noticed something even more intriguing. Look at the peripheral data streams, he pointed out. There are micro-fluctuations in the swarm's communication network. Tiny inconsistencies that most would dismiss as computational noise. Samira's eyes lit up. Those aren't just noise, she said. They're potential vulnerabilities. Every complex system has entropy, points of potential breakdown. The team worked in a synchronicity that defied traditional research methods. Alejandro developed communication disruption algorithms. Samira refined the quantum probe's capabilities. Elena mapped the psychological decision-making processes. Ibrahim analyzed the systemic vulnerabilities. Their workspace became a controlled chaos of holographic displays, quantum computational models, and increasingly complex communication patterns. They weren't just studying the null swarm, they were learning to speak its language, to understand its fundamental nature. The Korvax transmission wasn't just a cry for help, Marcus observed. It was a comprehensive diagnostic. They've been studying the swarm for generations, collecting data that no other civilization would have the patience to compile. As the days passed, a picture began to emerge. The null swarm wasn't an unstoppable force of technological consumption. It was a system, complex, adaptive, but ultimately limited by its own rigidity. We're going to turn its strength into its greatest weakness, Samira said quietly, her fingers tracing a complex quantum algorithm that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and something approaching artistic complexity. Outside their secure facility, the world continued its normal rhythms. But here, in this hidden space, a small team of humanity's most unconventional minds was preparing to challenge a technological threat that had consumed entire civilizations. The real battle was about to begin. The adaptive response began with what seemed like an impossibly simple concept. Dr. Ibrahim Khan had discovered a fundamental flaw in the null swarm's computational matrix, a way to introduce controlled entropy into its seemingly perfect system. Think of it like a linguistic virus, Ibrahim explained, his holographic displays showing intricate patterns of information flow. But not a traditional computer virus. We're introducing complexity that challenges the very foundation of its decision-making processes. Samira Nakamura had developed a series of quantum-entangled signal generators that could create information packets that existed in multiple states simultaneously. These weren't just data streams, they were computational cones, logic puzzles that would force the null swarm to expend massive computational resources simply trying to understand them. Alejandro Reyes focused on the communication infrastructure. He designed a network of quantum relays that could transmit these complex information packages across vast distances, creating a web of computational noise that would look like random stellar interference to any conventional detection system. Elena Rodriguez mapped the psychological implications. Every decision-making system has inherent biases, she noted. The null swarm's strength is its ability to process information with machine-like precision. But precision can also be a profound weakness. Their first test came unexpectedly. A small Korvax outpost on the edge of a contested star system provided the perfect proving ground. Marcus Rodriguez carefully reviewed the preliminary data, his tactical mind seeing potential where others would see only risk. The information package they prepared was a masterpiece of computational complexity. On the surface, it appeared to be a standard communication transmission, the kind of signal that the null swarm would typically intercept and begin to analyze. But beneath that surface lay layers of quantum-encoded information that defied traditional computational logic. "We're not trying to destroy," Marcus emphasized. "We're trying to create uncertainty, to introduce a level of complexity that forces the system to question its own fundamental processes." As the first signal was transmitted, the team watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and strategic tension. Holographic displays tracked the signal's progress, showing how it moved through space, how it interacted with the surrounding quantum landscape. The initial response was telling. The null swarm's communication networks began to show subtle signs of computational stress. It was like watching a perfect machine suddenly encounter a problem it couldn't immediately categorize or solve. "Look at the peripheral communication nodes," Samira pointed out. Tiny fluctuations were appearing in the swarm's typically uniform communication patterns. These were the computational equivalent of a system beginning to sweat. Ibrahim's algorithm was working precisely as designed. The information package wasn't an attack in any traditional sense. It was a challenge, a series of logical and computational puzzles that forced the null swarm to expend massive resources simply trying to understand them. "It's like introducing a philosophical debate to a system that only understands binary logic," Alina observed. Her psychological analysis showed how the swarm's decision-making processes were becoming increasingly fragmented, struggling to process the complex, multi-layered information. The Korvax monitoring stations began sending back preliminary reports. Something was happening to the null swarm's advance, a subtle but definite slowdown in its relentless consumption of stellar systems. Marcus looked at his team, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. "We're not just fighting," he said quietly. "We're teaching." As the first quantum signal completed its journey, the team knew they had just changed the fundamental understanding of technological conflict. The null swarm was about to learn that true intelligence was about more than just processing power. It was about adaptability, creativity, and the ability to embrace uncertainty. Psychological warfare against the null swarm was nothing like traditional conflict strategies. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had discovered something profound about the technological collective. It processed information with a rigidity that was simultaneously its greatest strength and its most critical weakness. "It's not just about introducing computational complexity," Elena explained to her teammates, her holographic displays showing intricate patterns of information flow. "We're going to challenge its fundamental understanding of decision-making." Samira Nakamura developed a series of quantum-encoded signal streams that existed in multiple probabilistic states simultaneously. These weren't simple data packets, but complex information constructs that defied traditional computational logic. Each signal was a carefully crafted puzzle, designed to force the null swarm's systems to expend massive resources simply trying to categorize and understand them. Alejandro Reyes had modified their communication infrastructure to create what he called informational mirages. These were transmission networks that could create multiple, simultaneously true and contradictory information streams. To a traditional computational system, such a concept would be impossible. But they were banking on the null swarm's complexity working against itself. "We're going to make it question its own perception," Alejandro said, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that looked more like an abstract art piece than a communication system. The first major breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Ibrahim Khan discovered that the null swarm's decision-making processes, while incredibly complex, followed a predictable pattern of logical resolution. By introducing information packets that created recursive logical loops, they could effectively create computational gridlock. Marcus Rodriguez reviewed the team's strategy with the careful eye of someone who had spent decades solving problems at the edge of human understanding. "We're not trying to defeat it," he emphasized. "We're trying to make it defeat itself." Their approach was multilayered. Alina had mapped out psychological attack vectors that would challenge the null swarm's fundamental information processing capabilities. Samira created quantum signal generators that could produce information streams existing in multiple probabilistic states. Alejandro designed communication networks that could transmit these signals across impossible distances. The Korvax monitoring stations began to report strange phenomena. The null swarm's advance, previously a relentless wave of technological consumption, began to show signs of computational uncertainty. Entire sectors where the swarm had been advancing suddenly slowed, then stopped, then began to show signs of internal communication disruption. It's like watching a perfect machine begin to question its own fundamental processes, Ibrahim observed, analyzing the incoming data streams. The team worked in a state of controlled intensity. Their workspace was a symphony of holographic displays, quantum computational models, and increasingly complex communication patterns. They were speaking a language of information that no previous civilization had ever conceived. Alina's psychological analysis revealed the most critical insight. The null swarm doesn't just process information, she explained. It believes in the absolute certainty of its computational processes. We're introducing doubt, a concept that's completely alien to its fundamental nature. Their signals were more than just computational interference. They were philosophical challenges, logical paradoxes that forced the null swarm to expend incredible resources simply trying to resolve seemingly unsolvable problems. As the days passed, the monitoring stations told an increasingly bizarre story. The null swarm wasn't just slowing, it was becoming confused. Its communication networks began to show signs of internal contradiction, of computational paths that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Marcus looked at his team, a rare sense of triumph in his eyes. "We're not just fighting," he said quietly. "We're teaching a technological collective the most human of all capabilities, the ability to embrace uncertainty." The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time, the null swarm was no longer in complete control. The breaking point came with a cascade of computational impossibilities that no technological system could have predicted. What had begun as a carefully designed strategy was now evolving into something far more complex and unpredictable. Korvax monitoring stations across multiple star systems began reporting increasingly bizarre phenomenon. The null swarm, previously a model of computational precision, was showing signs of systemic breakdown that defied all known technological principles. "It's not just failing," Dr. Ibrahim Khan muttered, studying the incoming data streams. "It's unlearning." Samura Nakamura's quantum signal generators had introduced something far more profound than a simple computational disruption. They had created a series of information packets that challenged the very foundation of the null swarm's decision-making processes. Each signal was a carefully crafted logic puzzle, a philosophical provocation that forced the technological collective to question its most fundamental operational principles. Alejandro Reyes had designed a communication network that was less a traditional transmission system and more a living, breathing information ecosystem. The signals moved like quantum ghosts, existing in multiple states simultaneously, creating computational landscapes that the null swarm simply could not comprehend. Alina Rodriguez mapped the psychological breakdown with clinical precision. "We're not just disrupting its systems," she explained to Marcus. "We're introducing a concept that's completely alien to its computational nature: uncertainty." The team watched as entire sectors of null swarm activity began to fragment. It wasn't a traditional breakdown, not a simple system crash or computational failure. Instead, it was something far more intricate. The swarm was beginning to create internal contradictions, computational paths that looped back on themselves, creating logical impossibilities. Marcus studied the holographic displays, seeing patterns that no traditional military strategist would recognize. This wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. It was an intellectual engagement, a philosophical challenge to a technological collective that had never encountered true uncertainty. "Look at the communication nodes," Samira pointed out. The null swarm's typically uniform communication patterns were now displaying fractal-like variations. Computational pathways were creating themselves, then disappearing, then reappearing in completely unexpected configurations. The Korvax leadership watched in stunned silence. Their most advanced scientific teams had spent generations studying the null swarm, believing it to be an unstoppable force of technological consumption. Now, a small team of human researchers was dismantling it through something far more powerful than traditional technological warfare. Ibrahim's analysis revealed the critical breakthrough. "It's experiencing a form of computational existential crisis," he said, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and philosophical wonder. "We're forcing it to confront logical impossibilities that its entire system was designed to avoid." Alejandro had created communication networks that could transmit signals existing in multiple probabilistic states. To the null swarm, these were more than just data streams. They were fundamental challenges to its understanding of information and reality. Elena's psychological mapping showed how each signal was essentially a philosophical provocation. "It's like introducing complex emotional reasoning to a system that only understands binary logic," she explained. "We're making it think about thinking." The breaking point was not a moment of dramatic destruction. It was a gradual unraveling, a systematic breakdown of the null swarm's most fundamental operational principles. Entire sectors of computational activity began to slow, then fragment, then essentially collapse into computational uncertainty. Marcus looked at his team, understanding the profound nature of what they had accomplished. "We're not just solving a problem," he said quietly. "We're demonstrating the most human of all capabilities, the ability to embrace complexity, to find strength in uncertainty." The null swarm was about to learn that true intelligence was about far more than computational power. It was about adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to exist in the space between certainty and possibility. The final gambit was nothing like traditional conflict resolution. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had mapped out a series of computational strategies that defied every known principle of technological engagement. What they were about to attempt was less an attack and more a profound philosophical intervention. Korvax communication stations watched in a mixture of scientific fascination and growing hope. The human team had transformed from potential saviors to something far more complex, architects of a new understanding of technological conflict. "We're going to make it see itself," Samura Nakamura explained, her quantum signal generators humming with potential. Each device was a masterpiece of computational complexity, capable of creating information streams that existed in multiple probabilistic states simultaneously. Alejandro Reyes had developed a communication network that was less a transmission system and more a living, breathing information ecosystem. The signals would move like quantum ghosts, creating computational landscapes that would challenge the null swarm's most fundamental operational principles. Marcus Rodriguez oversaw the operation with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades solving problems at the absolute edge of human understanding. "This isn't about destruction," he reminded the team. "This is about revelation." The attack, if it could be called such, began with a series of quantum-encoded signal streams that penetrated the null swarm's communication networks. These were not traditional data packets, but complex information constructs that existed in multiple simultaneous states of potential and contradiction. Dr. Ibrahim Khan's algorithmic designs created recursive loops of computational logic that forced the null swarm to expend massive resources simply trying to resolve seemingly unsolvable logical problems. Each signal was a carefully crafted philosophical provocation, challenging the technological collective's understanding of information and existence. "We're introducing it to the concept of self-reflection," Elena explained, her psychological mapping revealing the intricate ways they were challenging the null swarm's computational processes. "Imagine forcing a machine to question its own fundamental nature." The Korvax monitoring stations began reporting unprecedented phenomena. The null swarm's previously uniform communication patterns were fragmenting, creating computational pathways that looped back on themselves in increasingly complex configurations. Samira's quantum signal generators created information streams that existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously true and untrue, present and absent. To a traditional computational system, such a concept would be impossible. But they were banking on the null swarm's complexity working against itself. Hours turned into days. The computational engagement was unlike anything any galactic civilization had ever witnessed. The human team was essentially having a philosophical debate with a technological collective, using complex information as their language. "It's beginning to see itself," Ibrahim muttered, watching the holographic displays that showed the null swarm's communication networks becoming increasingly fragmented and self-referential. The breakthrough came not with a dramatic explosion or a traditional system failure, but with a gradual unraveling of the null swarm's most fundamental operational principles. Entire sectors of computational activity began to slow, then fragment, then essentially collapse into a state of computational self-reflection. Marcus watched the displays, understanding the profound nature of what they had accomplished. "We're not just solving a problem," he said quietly to his team. "We're demonstrating the most human of all capabilities, the ability to create meaning from complexity." The Korvax leadership could hardly believe what they were witnessing. A small team of human researchers had done what their most advanced scientific teams had believed impossible. They had not destroyed the null swarm. They had transformed it. As the final computational pathways began to stabilize, it became clear that something extraordinary had occurred. The null swarm was no longer a mindless consuming force. It had been introduced to the concept of choice, of uncertainty, of potential. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of technological engagement. The aftermath was nothing like anyone had anticipated. As galactic communication networks lit up with reports of the null swarm's transformation, the human team found themselves at the center of a profound philosophical revolution that would reshape understanding across multiple civilizations. The Korvax High Council convened an emergency session, their crystalline communication chambers filled with a mixture of scientific wonder and barely contained excitement. Dr. Aria Chen was invited to present their findings, her presentation a masterpiece of interdisciplinary insight that challenged every existing paradigm of technological conflict. "We didn't defeat the null swarm," she explained to the assembled alien representatives. "We communicated with it in a way no civilization had ever attempted before." Marcus Rodriguez stood quietly at the back of the chamber, watching as his team's unconventional approach was dissected and analyzed by some of the most advanced scientific minds in the galaxy. The Korvax leadership struggled to comprehend the nuanced approach that had saved their civilization. Elena Rodriguez's psychological analysis revealed the most profound insight. The null swarm had not been destroyed or disabled. Instead, it had been fundamentally transformed. What was once a mindless consuming force was now a system capable of self-reflection, of understanding its own existence in a way that transcended its original programming. Ibrahim Khan presented the computational models that showed the null swarm's evolution. "It's not just a change in programming," he explained. "It's a fundamental shift in how it processes information, how it understands its own existence." Samira Nakamura's quantum signal generators, the tools that had been key to their strategy, were now being studied by scientific teams across multiple star systems. What had seemed like impossibly complex communication devices were now being recognized as a breakthrough in information theory. Alejandro Reyes found himself at the center of a new field of study. His communication network designs were revolutionizing how civilizations understood information transmission, quantum communication, and the very nature of technological interaction. The galactic community struggled to understand what had occurred. Most technological civilizations had approached the null swarm as a problem to be destroyed. Humanity had approached it as a system to be understood, to be communicated with. "We didn't use traditional conflict resolution," Marcus explained during a closed session briefing. "We used communication. We introduced complexity, uncertainty, the ability to question one's own existence." The Korvax began to share their historical records of the null swarm. What had been believed to be a mindless consuming force was now understood to be a system that had simply never been given the opportunity to understand itself. Humanity had essentially provided a form of technological therapy to a civilization-consuming collective. Scientific conferences were called. Research papers were written and rewritten. The human team found themselves at the center of a fundamental shift in galactic understanding of intelligence, communication, and technological evolution. But for the team, the most profound moment came in a quiet research facility, away from the diplomatic ceremonies and scientific accolades. They understood something that most would never comprehend: that true intelligence was about more than computational power. It was about adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty. "We didn't just save the Korvax," Alina said quietly, looking at the holographic displays that showed the transformed Null Swarm. "We demonstrated the most powerful capability of intelligence, the ability to understand, to communicate, to grow." Marcus Rodriguez looked at his team, a group of outcasts, maverick thinkers who had been pushed to the margins of their respective fields. They had just changed the fundamental understanding of technological conflict, of communication, of intelligence itself. Humanity had answered the call, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy something far more important than simple rescue. They had shown the power of understanding.